We're ready to start.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Bowman, and I'd like to welcome you to our February SciTech Days event, Our Rivers. Thank you to those of you who are joining us inside the science stage today at Carnegie Science Center, and a special thanks to those of you joining us online. We're thrilled that you've decided to join us today. In just a few minutes, you will be introduced to some STEM professionals that play a role in keeping our rivers healthy. Before we get started, though, just a few housekeeping items. Please do silence your cell phones. In the event of an evacuation alarm, we will stop the program and evacuate the science stage using the bottom two doors, moving across to the main lobby or down stairwell B. Until we're outside, continue to move far away from the building. If anyone needs to use the facilities during their career panel, restrooms are located outside of the science stage, right before the lockers. There is an all-user restroom in Space Place if you exit out of the bottom right door of the science stage. If you need to exit the science stage for any reason during this panel, the door you entered will remain unlocked. And before we get started, I would like to take a few minutes to thank our sponsors. Without their generous support, we wouldn't be able to offer you programs such as SciTech. A big thank you to our premier sponsors, FedEx, Arconic Foundation, our major sponsor, PPG, our gold sponsors, Eaton, the Buell Foundation, Spectroscopy Society of Pittsburgh, Society for Analytical Chemists of Pittsburgh, WabTech Corporation, our bronze sponsor, Brascom USA, and this is powered by the Center for STEM Education and Career Development at the Carnegie Science Center. Our founding partners, Bayer, Chevron, Duquet Light Company, Eaton, Kennemental Foundation, Nova Chemicals, and PPG Foundation. Now it's time to hear from our panelists. Each panelist will take a few minutes to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do, and how they got here. Once the introductions are finished, we're going to turn the microphone over to our in-person audience to ask the panelists questions. Please stay in your seat and raise your hand if you have a question for our panelists, and one of our staff people will come around with the microphone. If you're joining us online, please do use the Q&A box to submit any questions that you may have. And a Science Center staff member will ask the question aloud for you. Questions can be directed to the whole group or to an individual panelist. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
Hello, I'm Julie Travellini, and I'm currently the Senior Director of Education and Curriculum for Allegheny Land Trust. If you don't know what a land trust does, it is a nonprofit that helps protect green space to keep it green forever. So within my role there, I do everything from purchasing and managing educational supplies to writing lesson plans and curriculum for every program we do. That includes for children as young as 2 and for teachers who come to us for workshops, community programs like mushroom hunts and campfire cooking, a wide range of things that we do there. My background is I have a bachelor's in biology and environmental science and a master's in teaching, both from Muskingum University, and I have a teaching license as well for 7th through 12th grade. I have a wide range of knowledge. I've worked at the Dawes Arboretum and Living Treasures Animal Park, as well as the Cincinnati Zoo, and I worked at the outdoor classroom before coming to Allegheny Land Trust. So my educational background is varied. I've been teaching environmental education for about 15 years.
All right, hello, my name is Ben. I work with Hedden Environmental, and Hedden Environmental is a Pittsburgh-based company that cleans up acid mine drainage. And acid mine drainage is what commonly occurs from coal mining. So around Pittsburgh, we have lots of coal mining, and after coal mining takes place, that can sometimes produce acid mine drainage, which can turn streams orange. So if you've ever been driving around Western Pennsylvania or central Pennsylvania, and you've seen streams that have this orange color, This is what is in the stream. It's iron oxide. It's this iron oxide solids, and it chokes out all life in the stream. And so what Hedden Environmental does is we build treatment systems, and those treatment systems trap the iron oxide in ponds and allow clean water to flow into the streams. And so we then can recover that iron oxide, and we can sell this iron oxide actually as pigment. So these burnt sienna crayons here, the pigment that, that gives the crayon these colors actually comes from acid mine drainage, from treatment systems. And so how I got to Hedden Environmental is I have a bachelor's in environmental science from Allegheny College, and I have a PhD in geology and environmental science from the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm currently an environmental scientist with Hedden Environmental.
Good morning. My name is Christine Phillips. I'm a watershed manager with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. I've been with the department for about 3 years. I've worked in consulting since I've been here for that, and that's been about 27 years. And I worked as a biologist or ecologist with a variety, with a consulting firm here and in my own consulting. My background is I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Old Dominion and a master's also from Old Dominion University. Things that inspired me to be in sciences were watching Jacques Cousteau and Carl Sagan growing up. So I always wanted to work as a marine biologist, but I ended up working as an aquatic ecologist.
Good morning. My name is Susie Bloom, and I'm the Director of Education with Rivers of Steel. Rivers of Steel is a national heritage area, so we are sort of like a national park, but we operate a little bit differently. So we have a lot of things that we do, including history and art classes, and of course our science classes, which are right next door to the Science Center. We have the Explorer Riverboat, and we take students out on the water, and they test Pittsburgh's 3 rivers to see if the water is healthy enough to support life. So we look for macroinvertebrates, we look for birds using the water, we look at the water chemistry, and we look at plankton. So I oversee those programs, including the history and art, and I have taught environmental ed for, 22 years. My background is a bachelor's in environmental science and ecology and a master's in parks and resource management with an emphasis in environmental education. And that came from a great program through Slippery Rock University. And what got me interested in this is, as a kid, I like to go camping, I like to go fishing. And in college, when I first started to learn about macroinvertebrates, I loved it. So I was hooked.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us here today. At this point, we would love to open it up to questions from the audience for folks that are in here, the theater with us, and for our friends that are joining us virtually. This is a great opportunity for our classrooms joining us on Zoom here today. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them right into the chat. We can take a look at your questions through there, and we can read them off to our panelists. To kind of get us started here, I can get the ball rolling, because something I always love to ask every science professional that I get to introduce myself to is something from your career that was your favorite project to work on, something that you remember that was super memorable, something that was fun, maybe one of your favorite projects that you had the chance to work on. Let's start with that one, and then we'll see what other questions we have.
Not necessarily, well, okay, so I'll do a favorite project. Very recently, I partnered with the Allegheny County Library Association, as well as Allegheny County Parks and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, to put together a program called Nature Explorer Backpacks. And those backpacks are in close to 40 libraries in Allegheny County, 14 libraries in Washington County, and there's only 2 libraries in Allegheny County, but they're in both of those as well. And these are backpacks full of nature exploration items such as bug boxes, nets, magnifying glasses, binoculars, field guides, all sorts of things. And they can be checked out of the library just like a book can, and folks can go out and explore their local green spaces and parks to learn about different things all around them. And there's probably, oh my gosh, close to about 15 to 20 different topics. So those backpacks can be checked out and enjoyed, and hopefully they can help folks learn a little bit more about what's all around them.
So one of the projects that comes to mind that Hedden Environmental has been involved with is the restoration of Babb Creek. And Babb Creek is a really great wild stream in north central Pennsylvania. And there was lots of coal mining in the hills above the stream. And therefore, for decades, the stream was dead. It didn't support any life. And Hedden Environmental was part of a team that went in there and built some treatment systems and helped get the water cleaned up. And now Babb Creek supports a very productive fishery, and it's a great place to recreate.
One of my favorite projects was in grad school, and we were, as a research assistant, we were responsible for going out into the Chesapeake Bay and several of the major tributaries, collecting monthly water and samples to study phytoplankton and zooplankton. With the DEP, one of my favorite projects was working on a permit for a new water treatment plant that's going in, and seeing all the complexity that's involved and the anticipated water quality benefits that we're going to see from that very shortly once it's constructed.
And I have to say, one of my favorite projects was working with students in Rice's Landing, which is in Greene County, and we did a program on the Monongahela River, and also we worked in Pumpkin Run Park, and we just found so many excellent things in Pumpkin Run, wonderful macroinvertebrates, the plant life down there too. We saw a lot of trillium. It was just a really beautiful place to work.
Thank you so much for sharing. We do have a couple questions coming in virtually for you guys as well. So the first one that I have for you is, what does a typical day in your job look like? And this can go to all 4 of our panelists.
I'll go ahead. No. I have no typical day. Every day is kind of different because it depends on what I'm doing. So some days I might be writing a grant for a lot of money, and other days I might be taking a group of kindergartners out into the woods to learn about plants and senses. So for me, my days are really varied. I don't have a typical 9 to 5 job. Tomorrow I'm helping teach a class about bees. So I might work a Saturday, I might work an evening. But we teach so many different topics that my day is never the same, which is honestly kind of nice.
So a typical day for me just kind of falls into 2 different categories. I even have more of a sciencey field day or have more of an engineering field day. And so a sciencey field day is one of my favorite days, and one of the reasons I love my job, which is I actually get to go out to a stream that is polluted. We work with mostly polluted streams, and it's up to me to figure out, why is the stream polluted? And so we get to take water samples, and we get to follow all the polluted tributaries up until ideally we find the source of pollution. And that leads into another typical day for me, which would be, okay, what do we do about that problem? And that's more of the engineering side. What kind of treatment does that water need? Is there room to fit a treatment system nearby? And all of the associated engineering that goes on with actually designing a treatment system to clean up the creek.
A typical day for me would involve, right now I'm doing 2 positions. I work as the watershed manager, which is my current position, and I review grants that come in for water quality improvement projects. I've just started in the last month, so I'm still learning that position. But I also am finishing up my former position as a permit reviewer in our waterways and wetlands program, and there I would review permits for wetland and waterway impacts and try to help the applicant minimize or find alternatives to reduce or lessen the impacts of development on these aquatic resources. One of my favorite things to do, however, is still to go out in the field and look at wetland and stream.
And my typical day is kind of like Julie's, where there isn't any day that is the same. But I do grant writing, which is a lot of application work to request funding to support the work that we do at Rivers of Steel. So I've had to do a lot more writing in my background, from my background, than I expected going into a STEM career. And I would recommend, if you have a chance to learn more about fundraising and grant writing, it's very, very helpful going into pretty much any career. And then I might be teaching classes. I also do a lot of the reservation work at Rivers of Steel. So I'm the same person you would get if you called a book a program. You're probably talking to me, and I work on writing lesson plans and pretty much a whole bunch of things. Sometimes I'm out in the field as well. I agree that is the best of times when we get to go out and do field work or teach people about what we do.
Wonderful, excellent answers. You've been having the chance today to tell us a lot about the work that you're doing right now, that you've done in the past throughout your career. I was kind of curious, do you have any dream projects? Anything that you haven't had a chance to work on yet that if you could wake up tomorrow and be doing it, something that you've always wanted to try? I would love to hear about those as well.
I'll jump in. This is more of like a retirement dream. I would love to work for the National Park Service and pick like a different park every year or two and travel around the US and do seasonal work for the Park Service, because I feel like there's so much to learn and it would be so much fun.
So a dream project of mine for Head Environmental is going back to the iron oxide solids that we recover from treatment systems. So as I was showing before, these are the solids that we capture in a treatment system to prevent from going into a stream. And while these solids can be repurposed as pigment for crayons or for paint, iron oxide is also very, very sticky. And so in a chemical sense, lots of trace metals, metals in very low concentrations will stick to iron oxides, like lead and like phosphate. And those are some of the metals or some of the chemicals that we want to keep out of our waterways. And so there's a real interesting potential here to use a waste product, this iron from mine drainage, as a benefit, as an environmental benefit, where it could be used to actually remove these contaminants from water before they get into our streams and our waterways.
I think a dream for me would be if somebody paid me a lot of money to travel around to different habitats and find as many species as I could. So essentially like, hey, go live and hang out in the rainforest and just see how many species you can find. I hike at what I refer to as an educational pace when I go places, so I never get very far, but you know, I could spend an hour and still be in the parking lot because I just love to find as many little creatures and things that I can. And I love using iNaturalist to log all that, and I'm kind of like obsessive about trying to find new species. I think I've found over 1,000 species in my iNaturalist time, so I just like to go out and find as many things as I can. So if I could make a career out of just hanging out at like one day in the desert and another day in the rainforest, finding cool stuff, I think that would be any nature nerd's dream anyway. Not everybody's dream.
My dream project would be for when I retire to work in habitat conservation. And I would love to travel the world to different habitats and try and work with the local populations on conserving their special places and making areas or ecosystems more resilient to climate change.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. So the next virtual question we have for you guys are, what are some common misconceptions about your work?
People think we're all tree huggers. I think people assume anyone who works in conservation is, long hair, long flowing skirt, hanging out in the woods, no shoes. And that's definitely not the case. We all love trees, but we love them for those scientific reasons. But yeah, I think we get a lot of like hippie connotations. People think we're all hippies, but I mean, don't get me wrong, I love not wearing shoes, but that's about where it ends.
I think kind of along that same path of working as in the environmental world, the hippie stereotype, there's a lot of science in our field too. And so while there's a lot of, I love being outside and I love the perks of that job, there is a lot of the STEM background that's required to actually get these treatment projects done. And so it's a great combination, but there is quite a bit of science and engineering required to clean up acid mine drainage.
I'm trying to think of a misconception for us. I would say that we're all very passionate, maybe not a misconception, but we all are very passionate about the work we do, and we all take it very seriously. A lot of us, have advanced degrees, so we certainly value all the science and the hard work that goes into that, to put into that, to have these careers. So I can't think of any true misconceptions.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's more guidance if you go into these fields to think about what it is you might want to specialize in doing. If you get an undergraduate degree in biology or environmental science, it is pretty broad. And so to think about what it is, what aspects of that degree most interest you, and pursue careers in that field, because environmental science could be anything from geology, chemistry, biology. It's broad. So thinking about what part of that excites you and pursuing that and figuring out how to get to those next steps. Do you go on to graduate school, or are you able to get experience with a job rather than continuing your education? So looking at those aspects of, just because you have a bio degree, you got to think about what you're going to do with it.
Wonderful. We do have a handful of virtual questions for you guys. So we'll ask a few more and then turn over to our audience, let them think of some more and marinate. But our next question for you that came through virtually is there anything that has surprised you about your job? And it's a two-parter. The second part is, and are there any skills that you weren't expecting to need?
I can go back to the writing, for the grant writing. And I also do a lot of accounting work because I do manage my department. So I have to create budgets every year and watch my expenses. So there's a lot more of that type of administrative work than I expected. And it's good to learn in your job, but it would have been helpful if I learned a little bit more prior to my job. I didn't take any business courses in college, and I think that would have helped me initially with getting started with creating that annual budget. And it was kind of daunting at first, like, what am I doing here? So those types of things are helpful.
I think for me, the one thing that was unexpected was the amount of writing that we have to do throughout my career, not just with the DEP. So being able to effectively communicate ideas, make recommendations, synthesize and analyze the data, that was something that those skills are really honed once you got to be working as a professional.
I wish I would have taken a physics class in college. I did not take a physics class, but yeah, also some of these skills gained from being outside in streams, such as measuring stream flow, I didn't have a lot of those technical skills starting my job. I loved being out in streams, but as far as how to measure stream flow and to look at some of the life in streams, the fish and the macroinvertebrates, I also didn't have a lot of that background going into my job.
Yeah, I wish I would have taken a computer class. I'm not very good at computers, and I have to use Excel more than I ever thought I would. So I would say, aside from the grant writing aspect and the writing portion, which I kind of expected, writing lesson plans, there'd be some writing, but not the technical, like, grant writing piece. Most people are much better at computers anymore anyway, but make sure you really kind of know Excel and budgeting and spreadsheets. Yeah, definitely more than I thought I would do.
Now, we have a really great question for you guys, and it is, how has your job changed in the past 5 years, and where do you see it going now in the next 5 years?
I had to do virtual things I never did before. And suddenly we found ourselves like, oh my gosh, how do you teach environmental education that is incredibly hands-on, out in the field, looking at bugs and creatures? How do you do that online? So definitely in the last few years, I've converted a lot of programming to online programming, and it takes a lot of creative thinking to think about how you can make something hands-on online and how you can still make it STEM and still make it meaningful for people. In the next 5 years, honestly, that tech piece is not going away. I think we're just going to get more creative with how we deliver programming and how we reach audiences. So I can really see it kind of expanding past what the pandemic has forced it to do, and it becoming something that is just, a leading force. We can reach so many more people through online and virtual programs.
So within the past 5 years, I completed my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh. And so my job now has a lot more research built into it, which is kind of interesting because when we think of research, we usually think of universities doing research, but there is a substantial amount of research that non-university associated people like me in consulting can do. And so because I have more of a geology and environmental science background now, a research background, I can integrate that more into my work and do some more research, which has been a lot of fun and really great. And where I see things going in the next 5 years is more treatment systems. There's still a lot of polluted water out there. And there is a surprising amount of support in some of the new infrastructure bills that have been passed for cleaning up that acid mine drainage. So we're really excited about that.
I think since the pandemic, I think for me, the biggest change was we processed everything digitally now instead of having paper copies. So I know that sounds goofy to the younger people, but that was a big transition for our office to go to digital. And I'm excited to see what changes in technology will come in the next 5 to 10 years and how that will make our jobs more thorough and the data collection easier. So I think that will be something to look forward to.
And for me, being in education, the past few years, we've talked a lot more about making sure we're being inclusive with the language and the stories that we are telling related to environmental issues, particularly with things like environmental justice issues, where you may have certain communities that maybe are high percentage of low-income residents or persons of color that might have more environmental hazards in their community. So making sure that we're reflecting that in what we teach about Pittsburgh's environment. So being more inclusive, and also again, this has been ongoing, the additions of being more inclusive with climate change language.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think we do have time for a few more questions. So if you have any more to submit virtually, this is a great time to put those in. If anybody in our audience has any questions, I know I see hands everywhere. My goodness. I will be running around the room. In that time, I do have a question of my own. A lot of the friends that are joining us today are at a point in their education where they're kind of looking at those next steps, what they're going to be doing next, figuring that out, which is a very big thing to do. Do you have any advice for those students who are kind of thinking about those next steps? Where should they start? Whether they think they're a science-minded person or maybe not and not sure about it. What advice would you give a student that's looking at those next steps?
So I would say try to explore all of your interests and hobbies. It's really important to know what you want to do, but it's also really important to know what you don't want to do. I thought I wanted to work in a zoo, and that's what I loved. That's what my goal was until I actually interned at a zoo, and it was so much work. I was exhausted all the time and sore because animal poop is heavy, and you get up really early, and you just never know. Until you actually get to do it, you don't truly know. So do some volunteering, do some internships, explore your interests, and really hone in on what it is that makes work not feel like work to you.
I completely agree. You got to try as many things as you can, because finding out what you don't want to do is as important, if not more important, than finding out what you do want to do. And so I did lots of internships. I did a few research internships in college, and that prompted me to go to grad school thinking that that's what I wanted to do. It turns out I did not want to be in a university setting. It wasn't going to work with how I understand myself. And fortunately, Head in Environmental worked out very well, where it's a mentally stimulating and rewarding job.
I would recommend that once you get into college, that you look for opportunities to volunteer, either paid or unpaid, or internships, where there's many different programs or opportunities as you can possibly obtain. See what you do want to do or don't want to do. And get to know your faculty well at school, either while you're still in high school or in college. They can be very helpful in giving you some direction and making contacts. It's very important to network when you're in school, either high school or college. So just make the most of every opportunity that you can seize.
I agree with the internship comments. I did an internship through the Student Conservation Association, and they have a lot of chapters all over the United States, and it's a great way to try a summer project, see if it's something you're interested in. I worked in forestry. I liked it, but I knew I didn't want to do it for the rest of my life. And then there's some also great resources online. There's a wonderful website called ONET, the letter ONET, and that lists a whole bunch of different careers and information about what types of tasks you might do on a daily basis, the education you might need to get there, just to give yourself an idea of what you'd be getting into if you went into a particular job role.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. So I do have a couple more questions for you guys before we do wrap up for today. The next one being, and I think it's a really thought-provoking one, why does it matter to keep our environment clean and healthy, especially our rivers and streams?
It affects our health. It affects our everyday life. It affects the ecosystem. It affects our food chains. It affects what's available to eat in the supermarket. If we didn't have bees, 3/4 of what's available in the produce aisle would no longer be around. So it directly affects our livelihood every single day, both economically, ecologically, economically, and physically with our own health.
I echo that. Also, not just for our physical health with what we're consuming, but in Pennsylvania, we do a lot of outdoor recreation, and a lot of people like to go fishing and hunting. And if we're not protecting the environment, we're not going to have these outdoor resources. But the number one for me is definitely our health.
Yes, I agree with our health as being number one, and to expand more on those outdoor recreation activities. In Pittsburgh, there's the rivers used to be so impacted by mine drainage, they probably didn't have much or any life in them. And so by increasing the health of our rivers and by cleaning up our pollution sources, now we can fish, we can recreate on the rivers, we can kayak, we can boat. There are bike trails nearby the river, they're nice to be by. So in addition to our health, there's also the recreation aspect of that.
I agree with all of that. I think, it ultimately comes down to our survival and our planet's survival, and in what kind of quality of life we want to have for our future and our children's future. So, we don't have much time to get it right. So that's very important.
Thank you guys so much. Now we're going to switch gears to a little bit more of a fun question for you. And that is, what is the wildest and/or weirdest thing that you have encountered or found in a local waterway or one of the rivers around Pittsburgh?
We have one site that acts as kind of a gigantic net along Chartiers Creek. So anytime it floods, you go there after the floodwaters go down, and it is just a treasure trove we've found tractors, refrigerators, children's slides, baby dolls, more golf balls than I think I could ever count. Yeah, so many ridiculous things that people think they can put in the water. It's wild what you come across.
So this was during college, during my undergrad college, where we would participate in, every 2 months we'd go and we would do stream cleanups. So we'd all go out with our canoes on French Creek, and we'd pick up mostly tires and slide, like playground slides and things like that. But one time we found a safe that had been blown open. And it turned out that the state police wanted it as evidence. So we had to hang around for hours while the state police came and they got this safe that was blown open that we found in French Creek.
One of the coolest things I saw, which was not in Pennsylvania, was seeing a gray whale scratch its back along an outcropping of rock along the Washington, or the Pacific Ocean of Washington State. And we were just feet from it, and it was truly amazing.
Okay, so it must be a thing because we found a safe also. We found one on the Ohio River. It was open. It didn't look like anybody had blown it up to find the contents, but it was open and there was nothing in it. So apparently there's a thing with dumping safes in the river. And you mentioned tires. There are so many tires. Don't dump your tires in waterways. That's not the proper way to dispose of them. All of us who work on waterways see endless amounts of tires. They're not good for fish habitat. Take it to Walmart or some other place and pay the money to dispose of your tires.
And that is actually the perfect segue into our next question. We do have time for one more question, either from our virtual audience or in-person audience for today's Career Connection panel. But our next question from our virtual audience is, what can I do, or what can we do in our lives to keep our rivers and our local waterways happy and healthy?
I think, for individuals, educating yourself on non-point source pollution, because that's more likely where you're going to be part of the problem. It might be, trash that you're throwing on the ground, or things that you're doing on your property with maybe not picking up dog waste or over fertilizing, making sure you're understanding how to properly do those things so you're not having a lot of runoff of those materials into our waterways. And then trash, do you need to have a one-time use plastic bottle, or can you fill up a water bottle? A lot of that trash ends up in our waterways from one way or another. So just making sure if we reduce things at the source, we're going to have less of that in our rivers.
I think a big one, aside from, the obvious of don't throw your trash in the water, and recycling and composting and all those things, is planting native plants. Even if you live nowhere near a body of water, native plants serve as a food source for aquatic habitats. So by planting native plants, you're attracting pollinators, things like damselflies and dragonflies and beetles, many of whom, like all dragonflies and damselflies, but many beetles lay their eggs and their young are born in the water, and those are our macroinvertebrates. Those macros serve as the basis of the food chain for aquatic habitats. So if you can plant those native plants and bulk up our pollinator population, who can in turn serve as that really key piece of the food chain, both in aquatic and terrestrial habitats, that's a huge, huge help.
So in addition to what everyone has said so far, one thing that everyone can do is get to know your local waterways. What do they look like? Are they clean? Are they polluted? If they are polluted, maybe why are they polluted? And so just getting to know your local waterways, streams, creeks, and rivers is a big part of connecting with those waterways, and then starting to think about, okay, how could this be better?
I would agree with all of that. I think the biggest thing we can do is controlling our runoff. So keeping what we put into our waterways clean, avoiding erosion and sedimentation, nutrients or excess fertilizer that gets washed into our waterways. That will go a long ways in helping preserve our resources here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today and sharing your stories with our audience, joining us in person as well as virtually. And thank you to everybody that came up with those fantastic questions today. Could we get a round of applause for our career panelists today? Thank you so much. Again, thank you guys for joining us today for our Rivers SciTech Day Career Connections. And I want to thank everybody joining us both in person and virtually again. We hope that you enjoyed this installment of Career Connections for SciTech Day. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy your time at the Carnegie Science Center. Thank you.